Ever since I started making videos about games, I've wanted to do a video of Invasion of the Air Eaters. This has to be the example of the best exterior of a game with some of the worst interior you could possibly imagine, but that's not why I'm doing it. This was the first war game I ever purchased, and it was the first war game I ever played, but I honestly played it and had it for decades before knowing that it was actually a war game. It's true. I just had a sense of war games as, I don't know, something else. Not really sure. But I found this game. It came out in 1979, and it was $2.95, as you can see. It's a micro game. And I got it not in 79. I got it in the late 80s. It was in a bin in the back of a game store, probably in Providence, Rhode Island, and I picked it up along with a bunch of other games of this ilk. I actually got 2 copies of this because I liked it so much. And you can see I still have one uncut copy here, and we'll look at these counters in a minute. I'm going to be using for the actual game a Xerox of that. I've tried to remake them so they're a little easier to see on film. What captured my imagination about this game was that in such a small package, you had a grand strategic level microgame, basically, that in this game, you were saving the Earth, and you have the map. The entire Earth is represented here from an alien invasion. And in such a small game, you get to move and mobilize hundreds of thousands of men in your armies. You have naval action, you have ground action and air fight, you have atomic weapons that come in through some optional rules that I always used. And the thing that really got me, and that I still think is so fascinating about this game, is that the key to it really is doing your R&D, your research and development, to further along the humans so that they can combat the alien and the superior forces that come down, and the R&D track that you're trying to do to modify and build up your tanks and your forces to attack in space, and to have the special disintegrator batteries and tanks that can combat the aliens who are coming down to take your planet. That just fascinated me, because in essence it is a race against time as your air is being consumed by the aliens who are coming with their air converters, represented here, that they're landing on bases to suck up your air. They want to take our planet away. They don't really care about us. They just want to take our planet. So they're sucking up the air. They're turning the air into sulfur dioxide, which is what they breathe. And they are protecting their converters with all sorts of sophisticated weaponry that you, as the humans, need to try to rush and develop things to combat them. And all of this in such a teeny little game. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it. Over the years, I have figured out a way to play it solo, and I'll talk about that too. It's not too difficult to do because it's an asymmetrical game to start with, and you can make some very simple rules for the alien movement and what the aliens do to play just one side of it and enact their response pretty easily. I'll tell you right now, with a game like this, you're not going to look for rules consistency or particularly thorough rules. So from the get-go, I think there's a little ambiguity in the rules in terms of the opening setup. This is an opening setup that I use. I'm not going to spend time talking about the rules issues. If you want to play this game and find it, you can figure that out yourself, and it's really not too big a deal. This is meant to be a light kind of fun game, and I think there's so much abstraction to start with. If a rule is ambiguous, just make something up and stick to it for your game, and that's basically what I do. But be that as it may, so with that disclaimer, this is the opening setup for the game. The aliens have landed. We have on the map up here this box that indicates in orbit, and we have the mothership up here, and contained, there's also an on mothership box that represents everything that's in here. What's orbiting around initially on the mothership that is available to come down are these escape pods here, which travel back and forth between the mothership and these landing units which have already come and landed, and it is from these landers that other things come out, and we will talk about that in a minute. We also have the all-important AC, the atmospheric converters that the aliens are trying to place around the world, and for every atmospheric converter that is there at the end of the turn, you are going to be needing to make an adjustment on this atmospheric index here, and it begins at 20 and will slowly diminish, and if you get to 0 you have lost the game because you've literally run out of air. So that's the timing mechanism for the game. And you have bases that the aliens will be landing, and this will be their seat of operations, and these crawlers here which will come out of the bases to move around and conduct combat. On your side, you have your army units. You also have some deployed submarine units that start the game out in the waters. Now, as I said, this is totally abstracted to such a degree that the armies are representing anywhere from 8,000 to hundreds of thousands of men, or troops, I should say. The air units, which are not depicted right now, can represent up to 2,000 combat air strengths. Then these are fighting single alien units. So that is the representation of the differential between how sophisticated these aliens are and how the Earthlings are sort of scrambling around to try to bolster their technology to fight off the superior aliens. Movement around this map, which is the globe, is pretty simple. It's either indicated as a U for unlimited movement or a 1 for 1 hex. And the map itself is an equatorial projection, so that the hexes around the equator represent about 2,000 kilometers each, and then they get smaller toward the poles. So that is how the scale is. Now, you'll notice there are some numbers on the map. Some of them are pre-printed, and some of them I had to write in because the map did not come with everything you need to know to play the game with the full set of rules. The pre-printed numbers represent industrial units, and this is an amalgamation of gross national product of various countries, and each one, so here's a number 1, represents about $100 billion in GNP, and they are scattered throughout the globe, and you must protect these because you need to be able to have certain values existing in order to do your R&D, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The ones that needed to be handwritten in are OUs, and these represent oil units, and this is an optional rule, but it's one that I play with, which is an indication of an average of various nations' oil production, or the percentage of the world's oil production. So you have the various values written here. When you're playing with these rules, you need a combination of existing OUs and IUs in order to conduct or to be able to advance your technology. The sequence of play is printed up here at the top of the map, and each turn begins, as I mentioned, with a check into the nature of the deployed atmospheric converters. These are the ACs over here, and for every successfully deployed AC on the map, you need to take the atmospheric index down by 1. Again, once you reach 0, you're starting at 20, the game is going to be over. The next thing that happens is that each deployed base that is in a land hex, so here are the bases here that come down. For every successfully deployed one, it is going to produce another alien unit, and there's a basic table that you roll on to see what it will be producing. And these will be coming out undeployed, and they will ultimately be deployed during the course of the rest of the game. The next thing that happens is that the bases and atmospheric converters can be moved around by the aliens. So there's obviously movement that's happening. I mentioned it's either going to be unlimited movement or it's going to be 1 hex. Now, if you're playing this solo, I mentioned that it's pretty easy to come up with basic rules for the aliens, and this is one where you need some indication of how they're going to move, because as the game continues, obviously your armies and forces are going to be spread out throughout the globe, so you need to have some indication of where they're going to move, and it's impossible to do it via a die roll. So, you could simply decide that it would move toward the highest value area or the lowest value area. And by value here, I mean these numbers here that we talked about, the oil units and the industrial units, because you are going to be protecting those. A major part of your strategy needs to be protecting those and keeping them intact so you can continue to do R&D. The next part of the turn is that you yourself can move as the humans around the globe, and then there is, of course, combat. The aliens will be firing first at you, and you'll be responding, and then at the end of that activity, you get to try to produce, counting up the existing industrial units and oil units that you have that have not been diminished in any way is necessary before you can conduct your production. Everything that you produce has a cost, and if you are playing with the rules concerning oil units, what you need to do is have an equivalent number of oil and industrial units to meet the cost. If you're simply playing with the base rules, it's just a cost for the industrial unit. So for example, if you want to produce a laser beam or laser battery, you need existing 5 IUs per unit, or if you're playing with the optional rules, you need 5 IUs and 5 OUs that you can produce. And this tells you there is a limit on the number of available units that you have. In terms of the production as well, you need to conduct this and then roll a die to see if it is successful. So you have to meet the cost, and then it isn't automatic. You need to have a die roll to see whether it's successful. If you have or met the prerequisite for it, increases your chances of successful R&D to 50%. Now, my feeling about this particular aspect of the rules is that it does need a little bit of massaging, because the way the rules are written, there's no reward for, say, successfully attempting something for a while. And in the sort of quote unquote real world, you might make, the progress might be iterative, whereas here it's just every time there is a die roll. Additionally, the modifier here to give you the 1, 2, 3 for success as opposed to the 1, 2 is just, it's not, you don't have to do it. The way that I play, you have to do that. So there has to be a progression. You cannot attempt to make a disintegrator battery, for example, if you already haven't gotten the laser batteries in the laser tank. So I look at that as progressive in the way that I play, because that makes conceptual sense to me. But that's not actually how the rules are written. So you can see why there is a strategy involved, not just trying to eliminate the aliens, but actually protect the valued hexes that have the IUs and OUs in them, because without them, you can't continue to progress your units. What this game offered me when I first bought it was a really full-throated look at an alien invasion of the Earth, and it had so much more than combat in it, and that, I think, ultimately was what drew me to it, because if you watch my channel, you know I've said this in other videos, maybe not so explicitly, but certainly alluded to it. Combat per se in a game actually doesn't interest me that much. And what I really love about war games is that combat per se is not necessarily the biggest factor. Strategy, tactics, modifications to strength and positioning, all of these things that go along with combat and conflict are, to me, much more what war games are about and why I enjoy them so much. Here in this game, there is the capacity for various types of combat. There is land combat. Here we're looking at the very short little table, basic D6 that you're rolling, and you can see even in certain instances like this crawler here, for on a roll of 1 to 6, it's going to be successful. So basically it's always going to be successful. It's really simplified, really basic, and that part of the game, despite the fact that there's orbital combat, land, ground, sea, it just doesn't take up that much time in the game. What you are doing is is you're moving around, you're trying to protect the hexes that contain the most significant resources and trying to increase your chances of eliminating the alien units by creating new technology to protect your air and succeed in staving off the destruction of the earth. And this, in the end, it's a lot in a little package. Yes, there are some um, rules ambiguities that you need to figure out. It's a little bit confusing. They could have been written more clearly. And in fact, I will tell you, because I'm showing you the back here, why I originally bought it. It says in the last paragraph, Invasion of the Air Eaters is a game of alien invasion for 2 players. Solitaire play is made possible by adding a pre-planned alien assault. Well, that is true, but there is actually no solitaire rules included. There is no pre-planned alien assault included in the game. And I know just from reading forums online that a lot of people have asked about that and wondered about that. It's not in the game. Maybe they planned it at some point. It's not in any supplements that I've been able to find either. The multiplayer rules were actually published by the designer sort of simultaneous to this in Space Gamer, and basically that involves national groupings, and there are on the Army counters, there is actually an indication, if you see up there in the upper right, that is an Indian unit. Here's a NATO unit, and there are rules where you can actually play with various political restrictions. I don't use those rules, partially because honestly, it's hard to see on the counters what's what. But there are interesting rules that provide, for example, restrictions on going into Russian and Chinese space, and restrictions on the different armies combining to fight each other, and that can add a little bit of complexity to the game. The one last thing I wanted to mention, I forgot to come back to, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's also nuclear rules. There are nuclear rules in the basic game, and the designer also provided more extensive nuclear rules in Space Gamer magazine that came out around the same time. Those are, I think, another dimension that is kind of interesting, because nuclear combat will have an effect, a significant blowback effect on everybody that uses it. In the game that I play, the nuclear rules become mandatory once the atmospheric index gets down to 5, because I figure at that point it is so desperate that if this were a real situation, it would be so desperate that the Earthlings would be willing to do anything, including destroy themselves, just with the hope of destroying the aliens that are coming to get their air. Invasion of the Air Eaters, it's available still. I've looked around. People are trading it, selling it for not too much. And if you are interested in this kind of 1950s, 60s theme of aliens coming to get the Earth, if you don't mind some pretty low-grade components, but with an awesome outside package, and if you're willing as a solitaire player to come up with some basic solo rules for alien movement and alien attack, this is definitely worth checking out.